So welcome to the lecture tonight. We're really pleased to have Margarita Forés here. And before I introduce her, first little lecture about the science and a few announcements. Next week, we have Bill Yossi's. He used to be the White House chef of the pastry chef at the White House, and has become a big fan of science and cooking. Comes every year and actually is learning science as well. We also, as usual, have aprons on sale at the back after the lecture for $15. And you have a chance to win one of these aprons. We have some questions from last week. So, Virgilio cooked ceviche by immersing raw fish in a sauce with a low pH. How do the hydrogen ions from the sauce get into the fish? You had your hand up before I even read the question. You must know, yes. Diffusion, very good. You have to clap for every one of these equations, especially the diffusion equation. Okay, Virgilio and Milena Martinez demonstrated a colorful dish with different grains. Last, they added caviar in the form of gel-like balls. What were they? What kind? Oh, very good. Yes. Do you remember what they were called? Kushuro. So you're also the lucky winner of an apron. But wait, we also have a book by Ramon Morato on chocolate. And for that, we have a different quiz. So they also cooked with freeze-dried potatoes. Freeze-dried potatoes. Anybody remember what they made with the freeze-dried potatoes? Very good. It's like a cracker, right? It was good? Oh. Next time you have to try some. So one other announcement. Next Monday, there's a special lecture. Albert Prodigy Johnson. He's giving a lecture at 4 p.m., so you can go to his lecture and then come here. He'll be at Yossi's. A real night of exciting lectures. So this week we're going to talk about heat transfer, and we're going to talk about transition temperatures and the Browning reaction. Actually, I want to spend most of the discussion today about heat transfer because there are a lot of things that Margarita does that we can sort of think about things and ask some very simple questions. Also, the recipe of the week is something that absolutely exploits heat transfer, and that's molten chocolate cake. So Margarita is actually well known. Actually, I'm really happy because this is the first time in the class that we've been doing it now for something like 6 years that we have a representative of Asian cuisine. So I'm really delighted, Margarita, that you could come. It's really kind of you to come so far, really. And these are some of the dishes that she's going to make. I'm not sure she'll, well, I think she'll show some of these things if she doesn't actually make them. Here are some dishes of various types that we can discuss. And let me focus there's a lot of other things that we can do, but let me focus a bit, say, on the meat, on the molten chocolate cake. This is a molten chocolate cake, by the way. Molten chocolate cake is cake that's cooked on the outside but is uncooked on the inside. And so the question is, the same with the beef that's rare in the middle, the cake that's uncooked in the middle. How does the heat enter? How does the heat come from the outside into the middle? What's the process by which it goes through something? And the process is diffusion. And diffusion, it turns out, is a recurring theme. And I'll show you some examples, but it's not just for heat. It describes how heat comes into a food, but it turns out it describes many other things. It describes how ions propagate fluid, through a fluid. It also describes, in principle, how a fragrance, how a smell propagates through the air. It's one of the mechanisms. And so it comes in from the outside and goes into the middle. Here's another case. This is some fish that's been seared from the outside. And this is a particularly good case because we'll talk about this during Margarita's lecture. We'll see something that's similar to this. And so how do we describe this propagation? How do we describe how far in the heat goes for a given amount of time? Well, by now you know the way we like to describe things is with an equation. You see, we clap for equations. So the length is how far you go in. The D, this is the diffusion coefficient. That tells how fast whatever the quantity is that's diffusing, that tells how fast the diffusion is, and time is the length of time. And this works for heat. In this case, D is the diffusion coefficient of heat. It works for diffusion of ions through a liquid. Actually, diffusion of any kind of molecule in a liquid, even the liquid itself. So you could imagine a glass of water, and if you took one water molecule and you colored it and watched how it moved, it would undergo diffusion. In that case, the D is the diffusion coefficient for the ion in the liquid. It also describes how molecules diffuse through a gas. And here are some typical diffusion coefficients for heat in different kinds of food. These are in units of millimeters squared per second. If I go back here, you can see the diffusion coefficient is units of millimeters squared per second. And notice the values. They're always about 0.13, 0.13, 0.10, 0.18. They're always about exactly the same as they would be in water. And why is that? Because it's mainly water. Now, there's this old story or demonstration of what diffusion really is. And I'd like to do this demonstration even though I didn't have the prerequisite ingredient, which is, I'll tell you what it is in a second. I didn't have that before coming to this class, although you might think that I'm always like this. But I want to do this because I wanted to then explain a little bit about what's really happening. So diffusion is often called the walk of the drunken sailor. So the walk of the drunken sailor is like this. So I didn't have anything to drink before. What does that mean? That means you take one step forward and one step backwards, maybe two steps backwards, one step forward. You're always going, if I only think in one direction, you're always going back and forth, back and forth. What that means is, look, if I want to go a small distance, that's really fast. But if I want to go a large distance, you know, I keep going back and I can't decide where to go. It takes a long time to go a long way. The larger the distance, the longer the time. That's actually inherent in this equation because the length increases the square root of the time. Okay, so I'll come back to that, but I want to discuss one other thing that's very important. Remember I showed you that fish that was lightly seared, and Margarita is going to make something that's similar to that. So there's one thing is to cook the inner part of the food, but you always want to have an extra taste, from the browning on the outside. And that's due to the Maillard reaction, and that's due basically to essentially burning some of the, a small number of the proteins, and these are some of the proteins that are involved. And that gives color and flavor with a specific chemical reaction just for the materials on the outside of the dish. I think with that, I'm going to introduce Margarita, and I may jump up and give you some examples of some of the things about diffusion while she's talking, but I'd rather do it with her beautiful dishes and try to explain them. Margarita, so pleasure to have you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Harvard University and the wonderful Department of Engineering and Science, and of course the spirits, behind this wonderful course of Science and Cooking, David and Pia. You don't know how my heart is beating. I'm just so happy to be here, to be able to share a little bit of myself, my work, my passion, and my advocacies with you this evening. I've chosen the title Confluence, actually, for my presentation, because I think that, first of all, my personal experience is a real confluence of many influences, decisions that let me take this journey and let me arrive here in front of you today. So, and then of course, the confluence in the cuisine of my country, which is what I'm going to share with you next after a little bit of my personal story, because that too is a wonderful confluence of many influences to create a beautiful, unique thing. So to start off, just a little bit of a story about me and how I got here. I was born and raised in the Philippines, but in 1971, when I was 11, my family left the Philippines in political exile during the Marcos years. The government clamped down on my family's sugar trading and export business. And my grandfather, who started it all, was traveling actually in America that September. And he and my grandmother just decided not to come home when martial law was declared. So the entire family kind of just moved to New York and stayed in exile from 71 onwards. And it was a very good time for a very sort of impressionable young girl like me to be in New York. As we all know, it's the ultimate melting pot of cultures. And I think if you need to know what's going on with the food industry all over the world and you want to just be in one place to see that, I think New York would be the perfect place. And my first interest actually was in fashion, and I started with the fur licensee of Valentino, the Italian couture house. So I worked actually on 9th Avenue in the fur district. So not the very pretty side of fashion. It was a very rough kind of environment. I was working with a lot of men that were working in the fur industry, trading skins, the Jewish community there. And it was, I was short, so I couldn't really put on the coats much because there were all these tall models who were working there. And it was just a weird opportunity because my mother's Italian friend owned the fur licensee of Valentino. After that, I met a Hungarian lady who was working at Valentino, and she kind of like took me in like a daughter, and she says, why don't you come and work at the Valentino office? It was closer to my mother's house, so that made it easier for me. And I think it was a wonderful opportunity because I had the chance to work with one of the strongest Italian brands. And that's where I fell in love with everything Italian. And I also learned what it takes to create a strong brand. So that was a really great opportunity. I loved the fashion part of it. I met a lot of Italian friends. I mean, we spent a lot of time, but I think what I enjoyed more was the evenings, not so much the work days, but the evenings when I would like cook pasta for them, actually. New York, at that time, there was a huge influx of Italian people starting businesses there because it was kind of challenging in Europe at that time. So there were very many new Italian concepts, not the red sauce type of American Italian concepts, but the Northern Italian ones. And that's what I fell in love with, making cream-based pastas and all of that. So I would spend time with my friends cooking more and more. We would go upstate to my grandfather's house and, you know, friends would hunt like maybe ducks and we would cook them. And that was when Martha Stewart just launched her first book. So I felt like I was channeling her, setting the table, creating the ambiance. And that's all of that, the cooking and the setting the table and being like the ultimate hostess, that's what I fell in love with. So that all ended in 1985 because unfortunately my grandfather passed away suddenly in November. So 3 months short of the EDSA revolution in 1986. So that was a bit sad. We all went back to Manila. And 3 months after, I mean, we became, a great nation again after Marcos left. So I was back in Manila. The pace was a bit slow. And for me, after having spent so much time in New York, so I told my mom, you know, this whole cooking Italian food thing, I said, can you send me to Italy? Because I really want to find out if that's my passion. So I found a teacher through a friend of mine who was in design school there. But I think I never plan anything. I'm not a planner. I'm not the type of like young person who said, okay, I'm going to be a doctor or whatever. I just kind of like coasted along with whatever came to me. And this lady, her name is Masha Innocenti, and she was just an Italian signora teaching out of her apartment in Florence. So I think that it was a blessing, actually, to start learning about Italian food that way, because I guess essentially the Italian cooking is really a home cooking kind of cuisine. So I found two other signoras. Masha was in Florence while Joe Betoya was in Rome, and then another lady, Ada Parasiliti, in Milano. So exposed myself a little bit to 3 different regional cooking styles in Italy. And that was just 4 short months, but I guess I tried to be a sponge and absorbed everything really quickly. I was alone, no Filipino friends, so I was forced to learn the language. And I was in my mid-20s and really also going through a lot of self-discovery. More than just the classes, I think I learned more from visiting the markets, eating out, cooking with friends. And as you know, in Italy, they're so generous about sharing information. So I think that 4 months there, although it seemed short, I think that I did learn enough to really kind of feel like this passion was what I wanted to do later on. So I did, come back to Manila really quickly, super excited about doing everything and trying out what I learned and letting people try what I learned to cook. So I would just do like small dinners for people, friends of my mom, friends of my mom, and that's actually what started my little catering business. And that was, I think, in 1987. And at that time, in the restaurant industry in the Philippines, most of the chefs were male. Hotel chefs were Swiss German. There were no women in the kitchen. And so when I met the general manager of the Hyatt Hotel, and he says, you're doing Italian food. Why don't you do a food festival at Hugo's? That was like the premier restaurant. So I said, well, okay. I think at that point, maybe the hotel felt that it was a good selling point. This girl from a background of someone who doesn't really need to work in a kitchen. They took a really good picture of me and put it in the newspaper, and it was like a fashion shot. And so they, to make a long story short, the festival really did well, and we did a second run. And I guess that was my break professionally into the industry. So I would do a lot of catering jobs, and within the 10 years of the catering business, I learned a good lesson about what it takes to succeed in the food business. It's not so much the glamour and being out there and people telling you, oh, you cook so well. I think it's more learning that what makes you successful is the discipline, the regiment. I was 25 and kind of still on party mode. And eventually, I had my son in 1990, and that's what got me settled down. So that's when I decided a few years after that to open a restaurant. And I guess the restaurant is more like a marriage, right? The catering business, you can choose the nights that you work. But in the food business, when it's a restaurant, you can't say, no, I can't open. So I started with a little cafe, an Italian cafe called Cibo. And it was really meant to be in a shopping mall. And at that time, most of the restaurants in the shopping malls were like either fast food restaurants or American franchises. So I wanted to do something that was locally grown, but doing my Italian food. So fast forward to from 1997, it's 2016, we now have 11 stores of Cibo. I also opened Luso, a champagne bar, which is a little bit more old world elegant. It's a nice little space that kind of transports you to old world Europe, which we don't get so much in Manila these days. And then another concept I opened is Grace Park. This is the most recent one. It's a farm-to-table concept, and it really was built to celebrate my relationship with the farmers in the Philippines, who are now starting to do a lot of organic produce and a lot of sustainably grown, not just vegetables, but everything, proteins, fish, and all of that. So this is a great place for us to do a lot of like slow food style cooked dishes, and a lot of, a very sort of versatile changing menu depending on what the farmers bring us. Okay, my latest baby is Alta. It's at the Ascot Hotel. It's my first venture into the hotel business. And what I try to do here is bring the standards of my sort of home style approach to the hotel business, which is very challenging actually, because as we all know, hotel operations really do things way ahead of time. So here the challenge is to keep the food fresh and to put the standards of my catering business into this 220-room hotel. So apart from that, actually the other thing that really I'm very passionate about is this thing that I'm doing with Casa Artusi in Emilia-Romagna. It's a culinary center that celebrates Pellegrino Artusi's philosophy, the father of modern Italian cooking. And they wanted to do an outlet in Asia to be able to tap the market of many Asian people who are very interested in Italian food. So pretty much when I'm in Manila, I try to be an ambassador for the produce from Emilia-Romagna, the cooking styles from Emilia-Romagna, making fresh pasta. And sometimes we do like cross trips. So when I go to Italy, on the other hand, during their food festivals, I go there and do Filipino food. So it's a wonderful exchange of the two cultures. Aside from that, of course, the main part of my business that actually made me fall in love all over again with my own cuisine is the catering business, because I've had opportunities to cook on behalf of the government. I've done a state reception for President Obama, actually, quite luckily, what a blessing, and for other heads of state that have come to the Philippines. And aside from that, I've also been sent as a representative of the Department of Agriculture to congresses abroad to be able to talk about Filipino food, like Madrid Fusion in Madrid, or Salone del Gusto, which is the biggest artisanal food fair organized by Slow Food in Torino. Then, of course, Identità Golose as well in Milano. So I think that confluence of falling in love first with Italian food, understanding respect for ingredients, and really the base of the cooking in Italy that is so pure and so simple, I've been able to apply that learning to Filipino cuisine, and at the same time allow me to have kind of the energy in me to advocate Filipino cuisine using the principles that I learned through Italian cooking. So I'd like to talk again next about Filipino cuisine, on the other hand, and the confluence that exists in Philippine cuisine. So pretty much, Philippine cuisine is influenced by two things. Of course, the first thing is our terroir, so whatever ingredients we have in place in our wonderful archipelago of 7,000 islands. And of course, the second influence are the things that came from outside the Philippines. So the first, we had a very Malay influence already existing. Then we got trade with the Chinese that passed through the Philippines since it's the gateway of Asia. And then, of course, by 1521, when the Spaniards came to the Philippines, we got the influence from them, plus the influence from Mexico through the galleon trade. And more of the ingredients actually from Mexico. And of course, 48 years of American rule, hamburgers and hot dogs in our spaghetti. So it's really like our iconic dessert, the halo-halo, which means mix-mix. That's what our cuisine is. In Luzon, it's very insular. So you have a lot of meat dishes, fermentation, nice fruits and vegetables because of the subtropical climate. The Visayas on the islands, a lot of coconut, chili, and of course, diverse seafood, shellfish and fish. And of course, Mindanao, on the other hand, since it's very close to Indonesia and Malaysia, the flavors that are very Malay there, and with a lot of layers of a flavor palette. And of course, the most prominent flavor profile is sourness in our cuisine. We use a lot of vinegars and souring agents. And at the same time, because the sourness is the most prominent flavor profile, we balance that with the other flavor profiles: saltiness, sweetness, bitterness. So it's really a combination of all of these flavors that come together. The calamansi, these are the souring agents now. Tamarind, we have the alibangbang leaf, we have tomatoes, we have our own limes, dayap, and even guavas. And these souring agents are the ones that make our food unique. So to be able to illustrate actually that the nuances of Philippine cuisine, I've chosen 3 iconic Filipino dishes to be able to explain the uniqueness of the cuisine to you. I'm sure you've heard of them. The first one is sinigang, which is a sour soup. The second one is kinilaw, which is our Filipino version of the ceviche. And the third one, of course, is the adobo. That's the one that you probably smell if you have any Filipino neighbors beside you. You smell that a lot. It's a very, very strong scent, very unique scent. And it's great because you'll be able to taste some of it this evening. So we'll start. We'll start first with the adobo. Right? The sinigang, the sour soup. So the dish is called a dry sinigang miso. Sinigang is usually a soup that it's a style of cooking because you can use many different proteins, from beef to pork to prawns to fish, but it's always immersed in a soup. And I'm doing a modern version of it today. We're doing a sinigang with miso, and the souring agent that we're using is the BATWAN, which is a unique fruit that comes from my province of Negros. And we're starting it off by making the sinigang with the BATWAN are the round berries, and we're making an intensified version of the sinigang soup and kind of like reducing the flavors. And mixing some miso, which is fermented bean paste. It's a version of the sinigang that we do in some parts of northern Philippines. I mean, like the middle, like Pampanga, the middle of Luzon. And here comes the fish. This is the Bohol white marlin, and we're just searing it very, very lightly. just like a few seconds on each side. So- Okay. Thanks, David. So we're just searing it very lightly on both sides and giving it some texture by searing it. And we're serving it with the vegetables that are usually in sinigang, the radish, the eggplant, tomato, and our long string bean. So the miso paste has been concentrated. So instead of a broth, we've reduced the essence of the sinigang and put it in that glaze. This is a dish that I did for a state dinner for the Emperor of Japan. And when I do a dinner like that, I also like to honor the guest by using something familiar to him. So the sour of the sinigang, I balanced with the sweetness of a teriyaki sauce using our Philippine raw muscovado sugar. And of course, we just garnished it with some edible flowers, a very old flower in the Philippines that's called cadena de amor. And this is the traditional sinigang that you're seeing now, so that you can see the two dishes and my interpretation in a modern way of the traditional sinigang.
So Margarita, you cooked the fish, and it was raw, and you could see it was cooked just a bit. She seared it for just a little bit of time, and I don't know, the fish was, to me,
Nearly 2 inches thick.
not
But an
2
inch and a half.
inches, an inch and a half, what's that, 3-4 centimeters thick. And I noticed that the fish was raw in the middle, and it cooked maybe a couple of millimeters thick. So I thought maybe we could just calculate,
Use
Margarita.
the formula.
Use your formula to calculate, if I could have my slides back, to calculate. So I watched her, and she put it on the flame, and I was counting. Okay, maybe it wasn't completely real time, I was counting. I don't know, maybe 15 seconds, and then flipped it over. So I'll calculate for 15 seconds, and let me calculate then what the diffusion coefficient. Remember, we talked about the diffusion coefficient. Let's calculate what the diffusion coefficient of heat is. And so we can do that because I took this equation and I squared it. So I got L squared, and I just solved for the diffusion coefficient. And so I'm going to say that we cooked, let's say, 3 millimeters. So that's 3 squared. And we cooked 4 times 15 seconds. So that's 9 over 60. And I did the calculation, I did the calculation earlier. 9 over 60 gives us 0.15 millimeters squared per second. Anybody remember what the diffusion coefficient of heat in water is? 0.14. So that makes sense, right? That makes sense. But we can ask a little bit more. It took 15 seconds. How long would it take to cook the whole piece of fish? Let's calculate that, and then we can ask Margarita if we're right. Because sometimes you cooked it, right? So we can calculate it. I won't do the whole calculation because I don't have to. I can just look at the equation, right? I just rewrote it to the equation. Here's the time, and it goes as the length squared. So I don't know, let's say we cooked about 10% of the fish. Something like that. So I want to cook now the whole fish. I have to cook for 10 times as long, right? So if I cook 10 times as long, then, I have to cook 10 times the length. If I cook 10 times the length, then the time increases. Remember, it increases very slowly. So it increases as 10 squared. So it's 100 times as long. So if it were 15 seconds, now it turns out it's about 25 minutes. Well, okay, that's going all the way in from one direction, but really they do it twice, right? So maybe it's not quite that much, but half that distance. If it's half the distance, since it's the square, it's a quarter of the time. So a quarter of 25 minutes is about 6 minutes. So I would say you would have to cook for 6 minutes.
6 minutes or 7, so it's really
Oh,
close.
pretty close. Come on, guys. That's not so bad.
There is a science to this madness. I mean, I'm learning now. Now I want to take the course. Okay, so we'll go to the second dish. The second dish is the kinilaw. This is our Filipino ceviche. I'll talk a little bit about the kinilaw, Angela, before you start the video. I was sharing this story with Pia and with David earlier. The kinilaw actually is one of the oldest dishes that's known to have been existing even before the Spaniards came to the Philippines. There's been evidence that they found in some of the caves in BATWAN City in Mindanao, where they found fish bones beside what looks like a nut called tabon-tabon. Okay, it's a nut that you can find only in southern Philippines. It has a very hard shell, and when you open it, I mean, it looks like the inside of whatever you would get if you opened a nut and it was still raw and uncooked. And this, the inner part of the nut, they scrape, and they use it to make the kinilaw of a large fish. And it is very, very bitter. And they say that they use it on the kinilaw, not only because it's a way to sort of keep the fish clean, but it also helps for the person who's going to eat the kinilaw because it allows them to protect their stomachs from getting spoiled when eating raw fish. So the bones of the fish and the tabon-tabon were found in the caves and carbon dated to have existed somewhere in the 1400s. So we feel in the Philippines that the kinilaw that we have all over the country, which you do depending on what ingredients you have there, what souring agents, and what vinegars you have in whatever part of the Philippines you're in, has been there for a long, long time. So before the external influences came, the kinilaw was already there. And we were even talking about it because if you think about the ceviche of Virgilio's country and the other parts of Latin America, they only use citrus. The acid from citrus fruit. In the Philippines, we use vinegar and some citrus fruit. While you have the countries in Polynesia and Hawaii that have their poke, which is the same thing as ceviche, but they oil it with sesame oil. So we're thinking, is there a connection that kind of flowed through the three different areas? Did it come from Mexico and go to Latin America, or did it come from Asia and go the other way? It's a long debate, but I think it's a wonderful thing to research on further. And I love working with kinilaw because you can do it with anything. And this dish, we're doing it actually with the raw crab roe. Okay, so we'll start, Angelo. Crab kinilaw mil hojas. Mil hojas is like a millefeuille. It is mil in Spanish. And first we're doing the dough that we use to make the layers of the wafer. And we're doing it the traditional Casa Artusi way, since I have that kind of background a little bit. We're using water spinach puree, and we're putting into a well of flour with a little bit of lard to make the gnocco and an egg yolk. And a whole egg, actually. So we're making the dough. This is a young chef on our team. His name is George. And I love his tattoo. And so he worked the dough, and he'll let it rest for a bit, covering it with some cling wrap. And that's really the traditional way that you would make a dough or make a gnocco in Emilia-Romagna. The gnocco is something that they usually serve with prosciutto di Parma. It's like a fried piece of dough. And now we're making a calamunding gel, or calamunding is a large version of the calamansi, which is our most iconic lime. And we're putting it through the Thermomix with a little bit of sugar and a little bit of xanthan gum. And we're using the Thermomix because there's a little bit of heat. It was 37 degrees Celsius. And of course, the blade of the Thermomix allows for the gel to form more quickly. So this is calamunding, or the large version of the calamansi, the gel that we made there. Then now, we're doing a cream of crab fat. So we're putting some cooking cream into the Thermomix, a little xanthan gum again so that you get that, a little bit of that texture, and this beautiful crab roe that comes from talangka, or small baby crabs that grow in brackish water in the northern Philippines. So we're putting, and we have some of that for you to taste actually today, because it's my most favorite ingredient in the world. Better than caviar. So this is the crab fat cream. So George is going to roll out the dough now with a mattarello from Emilia-Romagna. And basically you just roll it out thin to about, I guess, 1 or maybe 2 millimeters. And he works the dough, and then he'll cut it up into rectangles. And look at the vibrant color of the water spinach. And añoco is usually deep fried in oil, so he'll cut the rectangles and eventually we'll fry that. And it kind of curls up and puffs up, so it's a wonderful piece of very tasty dough. Sizzling. Then we have some Filipino blue crabs that are really nice and fleshy. And we just blanch them very quickly, maybe for about a minute. And we just take all the beautiful meat out. And then we're going to actually layer the whole mil hojas with all the ingredients. And the last thing that we're going to do is the kinilaw portion of it. You can see it's actually a very, very sweet crab. And we have a lot of, actually different crabs, but this one for me is the most clean tasting. So now we're doing the kinilaw vinegar. We used some tuba vinegar, which comes from coconut sap. And then in Negros, we do our kinilaw with a little bit of sugar, since Negros is sugar country. So we boiled the sugar in the vinegar. That also releases a little bit of the strength of the very strong tuba vinegar and tempers it a bit. And we put in the crab roe that was gelatinous earlier, but you can see it's changing and becoming opaque because it's getting cooked in that vinegar mixture. And there's a food writer who calls it liquid fire. So there's actually, I guess, heat transfer without actually putting heat on it. So we layered it with the crab fat cream, the crab meat, and then we're going to put the kinilaw on top. Isn't that beautiful, the crab roe? It's made, the one that I brought today actually is made by an 83-year-old woman who does it by herself. And a sack that's this high of about 10 kilos makes just 7 bottles. So you can imagine how precious, right? And then we used some calamunding gel. This is the traditional kinilaw that we made with tuna, chili, vinegar, and you can see that the tuna on the outside turns white. The middle portion stays red, but the outer portion gets cooked by the vinegar. So that was the mil hojas of kinilaw. And finally, we come to the last dish, which is my take on the adobo. And the title of the dish actually is 5 eggs and a chicken adobo. So before we go to the recipe, I just wanted to share with you, this is an addition, so that's why we're running a little bit longer, because I know that all of you have heard about the famous, or should I say infamous balut. That's the duck embryo egg, right? That kind of like makes people kind of turn away from Filipino food if they see it and they wonder about it. But I'll just explain a little bit how it's made. So you take a live duck egg, right? And of course the embryo is still alive. And what they do is they put them in a basket. And because the embryos are alive, it emits heat. So when you put all the eggs together, they kind of like incubate on each other. And we leave them for 8 days. And after the 8-day incubating of the eggs, this is the old way of doing it. There's a man that has a light box with a little hole, and he puts the egg through the hole, and if he sees that it has veins, then obviously the duck egg is alive. So he sets that aside, and if he doesn't see the veins, he puts it in another basket because then the embryos are dead. So the ones that are alive are cured another 8 days, and those are the ones that become the balut. While the ones that are dead are the ones that are put in a this is the light box, so you can see that if you can see through the egg, you'll see some of the veins. And we'll also show you how the other kind, the salted eggs, are made. So these are the salted eggs, and they're made by burying the ones that didn't have the live embryos in a mixture, an equal mixture of mud and salt. So it cures the egg in that mud mixture, and eventually, I guess the salt and the mud mixture makes the yolk get compacted and change in color. I think David will be able to explain the process better than me, but these are the way salted eggs are made. They used to kind of use red dye, normally to set them apart in the market. So you know these are salted and those are the normal baluts. But nowadays, because they don't want to use the chemical dyes anymore, they just separate them and they say balut. But at least you can see what it looks like. So we'll start with, this is 5 eggs and a chicken in adobo. Okay, so we start by making a deconstructed adobo sauce. Just the sauce without any protein. So it's water, the 3 liquids, water, vinegar, and soy sauce, cooked down, and then we add, because I'm negrense, this is a sweet adobo, because there are many versions of adobo, so they call it an adobado. Then we add the garlic, and then the bay leaf and the peppercorn, which are just the simple ingredients that go into making an adobo. And this is reduced, and then we use it to kind of like marinate some of the quail eggs. We use the adobo sauce in the quail egg. Then we're doing the cured egg yolk. So this is a simple chicken egg yolk, and it's put in a mixture of 70% salt and 30% sugar. And you just bury it in that mixture. And actually within 20 seconds, you'll notice that the film on the outside will start to actually change and solidify. And as the time passes that it's buried in the salt and sugar mixture, it gets cured, and I guess the moisture is absorbed. And you'll see that later, actually. And we're doing the chicken glass. So it's chicken skin. We scrape off the excess fat, and we cut it into squares. And we'll put them on some parchment paper, some cooking paper, and so that it absorbs a little bit of the moisture. And then we put it in a 375-degree oven for about 45 minutes. And eventually it becomes crisp like glass. Okay, now we're curing some of century eggs. So that's the 3rd egg, right? This is just sugar and white vinegar, this time from sugar cane. And we're using just the outside of the century egg. The century egg is actually another kind of egg that's used a lot in Chinese cooking, and I think that the process is even longer than making the salted egg. So this is like pickling the quail egg. So the first thing we're going to do with the salted egg is make a panna cotta out of it. And notice how beautifully orange the egg yolks are. So we put them in the Thermomix, and we're going to add some milk, salt, and just some gelatin, and again through the Thermomix with a little bit of heat to blend everything. So it's nice and golden because of the yolk. And then we're going to use rectangular molds and pour the salted egg mixture. And we chill it until it solidifies. So here's the balut now. First, we take the broth out. Don't cringe. Once they peel it, so you'll see the embryo on the right side, yeah, and that's the egg white on the left, and there's a bit of yolk on the left side, and we're taking the embryo, putting it into the Thermomix, so that you don't see what it looks like when you enjoy it. And again, the same thing. We put some milk and we put salt and the balut broth, actually, which is very, very flavorful, and some milk. And the gelatin. And once the salted egg panna cotta is solidified, you can pour the balut mixture on the outside. Actually, there are people that make balut here in the States because they have balut eating contests in New York. So maybe next year we'll bring some. So we're assembling the dish now. We have some more salted egg cream there. And you'll see that the panna cotta is already now nice and firm. And then we take some of the chicken glass and let it stand. Look at how nice and crisp and see-through it's become. And then this is how the the cured egg yolk becomes after 24 hours of curing. It actually has the texture of like botarga di Mugine from Italy, completely opaque and with the same kind of firmness all the way through. And then here we go with the pickled century egg. And then there's our quail egg that has the adobo glaze on it, the adobo sauce. And there we go. And this is some wood sorrel that grows actually like weeds in the Philippines. I mean, the gardeners take it away because they think it kills the ornamental plants. But apparently, Rene Redzepi started using that, and we realized we have it in the Philippines all over. So we're finishing the dish with just a little bit more of some salted egg cream. And you'll see now what the traditional adobo looks like. And we always eat it with achara, which is a pickle. So that's why we have the pickled century egg. And so this is my modern take on the adobo. 5 eggs and a chicken in adobo. Oh, I'm gonna cook now. Actually, it's one of the easiest dishes to make. This is some cubed pork belly. And basically, you just put in all the liquids. Some people do it just with vinegar and soy. Some people add a little water if they want it to be a little more saucy. So this is the vinegar, the soy. Actually, the vinegar and the soy that we're using today is a Japanese soy sauce and some white distilled vinegar. Now, the white distilled vinegar is actually a little bit milder than the strong Filipino vinegars we have, because we have vinegars from nipa, is that the mangrove palm, right? And then we have vinegars from coconut. We have vinegars actually from fruits, from pineapple, and of course from sugarcane, and just a huge variety, a very, very diverse selection of vinegars in our country. And a lot of our dishes actually use vinegar in them. And then the garlic. Some of us actually leave the skin on. This is super easy. I think you can do this at home. We were talking a little bit about the adobo that we made for you in the back, because I noticed that the garlic here in America, strangely, maybe also because of the kind of vinegar that we use today, changed color. It turned into green in the inner portion. And apparently it's a pH reaction, I think. Maybe David can explain it later. Yeah. Peppercorns are here. Okay. So basically, you just braise everything together on a slightly higher heat at the start, and then when it starts to boil, then you just kind of reduce it to a simmer. And some laurel. Maybe one more for good measure. I think the laurel's meant to take some of the gaminess from the meats away. So with the adobo, the classic adobo is really chicken and pork or just pork. But nowadays people, it's really more a cooking style rather than a dish. So we make adobo out of beef. We make adobo out of squid with the squid ink. We make adobo out of banana hearts. It's really just the braising of any protein or any vegetable or with vinegar, soy, garlic, pepper. And we actually even make adobos with different ingredients. You can actually do an adobo with coconut milk. They call it adobo sa gata. Or you can do an adobo sa puti, which means adobo in white, which is actually the original traditional adobo before taking on the influence of the soy sauce from the Chinese. So you can actually do it with just vinegar and whatever juices come from the protein that you're using. If I can share, one of my most favorite adobos actually is lamb. So if you get some nice lamb shoulder and just do it this way, it comes out really, really great. So basically you just allow it to braise. We'll add some water so there's a little bit more of cooking liquid. And when this boils over, you'll see that the meat will start to kind of get darker and take on the color of the soy. The soy that we use, the Japanese soy sauce, is much more refined than the soy sauce that we have in the Philippines. That's a lot like blacker and darker. So an adobo with our soy sauce will probably come out darker. That's probably why the adobo that you saw in the photograph was much darker. So shall we just leave this? Easy, right? Then you'll see the cooked version because we'll pass around some samples. So should I close? Yes. I just wanted to say one thing in the end. I actually have a confession to make. I just wanted Pia and David to know, and Tim, who gave me the ID today, that this is such an overwhelming thing for me because in 1976, I got waitlisted at Radcliffe. So when you invited me, people always say that dreams don't always come true, but I guess for me, I'm getting teary-eyed now. They do come true, not at the time that you might want them, but they come and spring a surprise on you sometimes 40 years down the road. Exactly 40 years. So thank you so much for this. Thank you.